Welcome to the recorded version of Volunteerism, a salute to senior service, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
So our presenter today is going to be Dr. Amy Dupree. Dr. Dupree, a gerontological social worker, is an internationally renowned expert on lifestyle issues relating to caregiving, retirement, aging, and family dynamics. Dr. Dupree is president of Essential Conversations, Inc. and Dr. Amy, Inc., a company dedicated to family caregiver wellness. Dr. Dupree holds a PhD and master's in social work, specializing in gerontology, and she earned her CSA, a designation for which she also trains others as part of their accreditation. Dr. Amy Dupree is a much sought-after speaker at corporate and professional events on the topics of caregiving, aging, and retirement, and she is also a frequent guest on radio and television. And with that, I would like to welcome back again Dr. Amy Dupree. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Steve. Happy New Year. And let's get started today. As you said, we're going to talk about volunteering and what the benefits are to volunteering. We're going to take a look at some various aspects of this and is how we as professionals hopefully can encourage our clients and older adults in our lives to volunteer and what a difference that makes for everyone, really. I'm sure it won't surprise anyone that today's older adults are volunteering in big numbers and in big ways. And the truth is we know the results are really, really positive. There was a national study that was conducted by the Home Instead Senior Care Network, and it found that 52% of older adults volunteer their time through unpaid community service. So over half of older adults are volunteering, which is pretty amazing. And the good news is they have no plan to stop and probably plans for many more people to start. So let's talk about the numbers for a second. 1 in 5 older adults said that he or she started volunteering at the age of 65 or older. And as I'm sure we can guess that a lot of that is because as people stop working, they're looking to replace work with something that has meaning in their lives, and volunteering is a great way to do that. Many people do volunteer before 65, but because of work and family obligations, just don't have as much time to do it as people do after the age of 65. So of those 1 in 5 older adults that started after 65, most of those folks, about 87%, said their volunteer work is either very important or the most important thing that they do, which I think is pretty amazing when you start talking about, the sense of purpose and meaning that we know people try to maintain throughout their lives. Without a doubt, we can say that the service that these older adults is doing is helping many, many people. But there's an added bonus, and that's that volunteerism provides really important health benefits to the older adult as well. Nearly all older adult volunteers say they feel better emotionally and physically. In fact, 95% of adult volunteers feel that older adults who do volunteer are healthier and happier than those who do not. Now, if you have clients and they aren't volunteering already, they can obviously find many places to do that. They can ask at their place of worship. They can contact local nonprofit organizations or senior centers for ideas. It's likely there'll be a whole host of opportunities just waiting for them if they just step forward. You can share with your clients that all volunteer opportunities don't involve either heavy lifting or doing tasks that they don't want to do, that they can contribute as little or as much as they want, time-wise and of their skills, and that really they can match their skills to the volunteer job. In addition to helping other people, there's another benefit we want to talk about volunteering. It really does set a great example for the younger people in their lives, and perhaps it will help inspire them to service as well. So all of this is very, very important. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to discuss on this webinar today. So as you can see here, we're going to discuss several very important things related to senior service. First, we're going to talk about the impact of senior service on the local communities. What's the benefit there? And then we're going to talk about the health benefits specifically that stem from volunteering. And we're going to end up by reviewing some tips for how adults can inspire the next generation to volunteer. And in between all of that, what we do want to do, too, is just talk about how we as professionals can work with our clients to make this a very rich experience in their life and not just something that they're going out to do because they don't know what else to do with themselves, but something they look forward to and they really do because they get all of these great benefits. We're going to end also by talking about a great list of volunteering resources. But let's start with the impact of senior service on local communities, and what does that look like? So again, let's talk about some of the numbers. The number of older adults who volunteer is staggering, and their service is having enormous positive impacts on the quality of life and really on the economy as well. The Corporation for National and Community Service said that between 2008 and 2010, you can see there that 18.7 million older adults contributed on average more than 3 billion hours of service in their communities per year. The yearly economic benefit of this service to the nation equals more than $64 billion a year. Now, that's pretty amazing when you think about that. And, you know, one of the things as we talk about this topic that I think it's also a great way for those of us who work with older adults and just who are living in our communities to remember is that this is one of the bad raps, I think, that people get as they age, is that they're taking from their families and taking from their communities and they're a drain. Well, when you know these facts and figures, it's hard to feel that way because truly what we know about older adults is that they are in the giving mode really for the vast majority of their life. It is usually a very brief time, if at all, in someone's life that they're on their receiving end. And, you know, I actually just had this conversation with a neighbor of mine this morning as I was walking my dog, and we were talking about how older adults, people assume that they're relying on their family and taking from their family. And we were talking about everyone that we know who is still receiving some sort of either emotional support or support with babysitting or support of a more tangible financial kind from their aging parents. And that really that flips only in the last few years. I know with my own parents, it was only after my mother had a massive stroke that they began to move into the position of needing things from me. And even during that period, there was much that I still was getting back from my parents. So I think as we look at how do we combat ageism, this is one of the ways that we can do it, is by recognizing that if we took seniors out of our families and communities, we'd be in big trouble because we rely on them for this kind of service. Now, Home Instead Senior Care did a similar study to the Corporation for National and Community Service, and let's take a look at their results. So in the survey that Home Instead Senior Care Network conducted, it was a national survey, and it found that nearly half of volunteers who are retired say they're busier now than when they were working. And I'm sure many of us know people who, when you ask them how are they doing in retirement, that is their response. Now, I have the great opportunity to do some work in the retirement area, and I work with folks who are pre-retirement, and I do workshops on this talking about how do you sustain meaning in your life forever. And one of the things I know from that work is that is one of the biggest struggles that people have in retirement. They think it's going to be easy, and they're going to retire, and everything's just going to fall into place. And yet we know for many people what they really miss are they miss the social connections they had in their work. They miss the sense of giving back and of service that they had on their job. They start to lose their sense of identity. They may miss having a schedule. And the beauty about volunteering is it can replace all of those things. Now, older adult volunteers provide about 15 hours of service each month. And you see the places that they're working, churches, schools, hospitals, senior centers, and other nonprofit organizations doing very hands-on projects. So the kind of things that we see people doing are just what you see in the responsibility side, preparing, collecting, distributing food, providing companionship, fundraising, training, teaching, coaching. A majority of senior volunteers also said they put their money where their time is because they also donate financially to the organizations where they volunteer. This is all very, very important things that you can imagine, both for the person and, again, for the community. Imagine taking all of that out of our communities. Many older adults say that availability of more time in their lives is just one of the reasons why they volunteer. Even more importantly, they said in that survey, was they wanted to help others, they wanted to offer meaningful assistance, and they wanted to make a difference in their communities. When they were asked in the survey about how volunteering compared to other things in their lives, older adults said volunteering is, again, among the most important things they do. And as a result, a majority of them say they plan on volunteering forever. And, one of the things that I know when I was looking at my own parents' retirement was I watched how much both of my parents volunteered, but especially my mother. And one of the interesting things that happened there was my mom volunteered at both the local nursing home and the local hospital, as well as the faith community they belonged to. And after my mother had a massive stroke, she ended up in a rehabilitation in that nursing home she'd been volunteering in. And it ended up being such a fabulous rehab experience for her because they all knew her. And I remember at the time thinking how many lives she had touched in the 9 years they had lived in that community and through all the volunteer things she had done, and how many people she had come to know. And I thought, at that time, I hadn't yet started doing the retirement workshops I do. I thought, what an amazing opportunity we have in our later years if we choose to take it when our time expands to really do this. And I think that's what we as professionals can encourage older adults to do. Okay, so now let's take a look at the health benefits that come. Those are the community benefits, but what happens for the individual? Almost all older adult volunteers said they give time to causes in their community because they want to help others and make a meaningful difference, which is fabulous. It's very altruistic. But something else very positive happens. The volunteers end up feeling better physically, emotionally, and mentally themselves. And this is, by the way, very well documented in research. In fact, 95% of older adult volunteers feel that other people who are doing it must be happier and healthier too. So they perceive it as a really important thing to do. One of the things that I think is so key here when you look at the home instead study was that 7 out of 10 older adult volunteers say they overcame feelings of isolation and depression by volunteering. And this is particularly true among those with chronic conditions. And if you look at the Corporation for National Community Service and what their findings have shown, they have found that those who volunteer have, as you see on your screen, lower mortality rates, greater functional ability, and the lower depression, again, lower rates of depression later in life. And given how rampant depression and anxiety is in the older adult population, this is very, very key. We have to recognize, especially there's been some studies that show for men in retirement, there's an upsurge of anxiety and depression. And this is one way to combat that because it is tied to the loss of purpose and meaning and that sense of identity. And again, a good volunteer position can really combat a lot of that. 98% of the people volunteering said it gave them a sense of purpose and it provided them an opportunity to share their skills and experience. And without that opportunity, many times people feel like they have sort of lost, why did I build up all these years of experience to have it disappear once I stopped working? Other older adults in the survey say they enjoy the socialization aspect of volunteering. And I think we can't minimize how important it is to look at the social support aspect of this. The research on social support has been going on for decades, and the findings are very, very clear. We have a deep and a wide body of research on social support. And we know that older adults who have good social support as they age live longer, live healthier, both mentally and physically, are less apt to end up in a nursing home, heal quicker from illnesses, and the latest research is showing a protective factor against Alzheimer's disease. And it's not a big leap to tie social support and volunteering together because for many older adults, it really is a key aspect of volunteering. They're around people, they're engaged, they're not sitting home isolated. In fact, more than 40% said that they typically volunteer with someone else. So again, it becomes an activity that they can share. And at a stage in life when numbers of friends may be dwindling, 92% of older adults said volunteering is a way to make new friends. And again, I think that's key because we look at what happens to people's social support as they age, and if they don't continue to grow their social support, it just naturally shrinks because people move, people die, and relationships shift. So by volunteering, it's an excellent way for people to potentially not just be around other older adults, but to be around people of all ages where they may share a common passion, a common commitment to some social good, and it allows them to build some of those friendships. So incredible emotional health benefits from volunteering. Now let's shift from that and take a look at some of the physical health benefits that come along. And I think this list is pretty impressive. So we know that on the physical side, 3/4 of older adult volunteers who suffer from chronic health conditions, such as the one you see there, arthritis, the most common, high blood pressure, diabetes, dementia, say that, and we should have depression up there as well, say that staying active through volunteering helps them better manage their health problems. And you know, again, if you step back, there's some good research that explains the correlation on this, why we know that this is so important, and I'm not going to go into that research now, but we know it really makes a big difference in people's lives, so both on the emotional side and on the physical side. So let's now talk about ways to encourage service in younger generations, because this is one of the key benefits for older adults. So a majority of older adult volunteers said they're volunteering more now because the need is greater as a result of the economy, and I think that probably makes sense to a lot of us that, you know, many programs have been cut. There's a need for more volunteers because there's fewer staff. But the evidence is there that supports that the call to volunteering is actually passed from generation to generation. So in the Home Instead survey, a majority of senior volunteers said they learned the importance of volunteering from their parents' community service. And I just told you a story in my own life where that was always a very key value in my family, was to volunteer and to give back in the community. And it was something that absolutely I got by watching my parents and other older family members volunteering. And that's a common story. You know, the line I love is that more is caught than taught as we're growing up. And that's one of those things that really is caught. You watch people volunteer, you see the benefits to them, you see the sense of accomplishment and the sense of just feeling good that you've made a difference in someone else's lives. And we know that kids pick that up as well and are more apt to volunteer. There was an interesting article I read this past week in the Globe and Mail newspaper in Canada about younger people and kids and teaching them to do volunteer acts and the benefit in their lives and how it changed them as people. And it was pretty substantial and pretty startling to see how much better off kids felt about themselves and how much higher their self-esteem was when they were encouraged to do things for other people and to volunteer. So again, just another aspect of this. Many older adults, approximately about 40%, also typically, as I said, share their volunteer experience with someone else, and you think perhaps spouse, but it's also oftentimes a friend. Most of the respondents said they have encouraged their children to give back to their communities and that their children were also doing that as well. And how do older adults go about encouraging the younger generation's participation? Well, if they regularly attend a grandchild's sporting event or dance event or some music or other extracurricular activity, they can tell them about what they do and how it makes them feel. So they can talk about their volunteer experience. That's one of the key ways to do it, to share verbally with their grandchildren. And then if it's appropriate, they can also invite them to join them on the activity or find one that interests both of them. One of the ways definitely to do it is to find an activity that a grandparent and grandchild can do together. By giving someone the opportunity to directly see and experience how volunteering can make a difference in others' lives is really the best way to encourage them to do it on their own. Now, the other part about that, though, and it says this on your screen, about take it slow and praise them, it's good not to tire them out too much on the first go-around, not to make it so exhausting that it's no longer fun. And if it's deserving, they should be sure to make sure they publicly praise them for their good efforts. Letting parents, teachers, and other adults know that this young person did something in a very positive way is really, really a good thing, and it makes a huge difference to the kids often to get that sort of public sense of accomplishment and praise. Sharing how happy and proud that they are of what they did can go a long way to encouraging children and really can help pass along the torch of volunteerism. Another aspect of this, when you think about not just passing it along, but how do we help our older clients match? This is a really key part of volunteering and something we don't talk enough about. And there's some great resources I'm going to share with you in just a moment that can help you do this. But one of the biggest issues that we see that happens for people that makes them feel negative about their volunteer experience is if they volunteer somewhere and their talents aren't recognized and they end up doing really just the grunt work that nobody else wants to do. So one of the things that we can do is both help the older adult and the organizations by helping make a better match and also by helping organizations do a better job of recognizing that volunteers shouldn't be just used to do all the awful things that nobody else wants to do. I had a great opportunity about a decade ago to go to Eastern Europe and to work as part of the Soros Foundation with 15 Eastern and Central European countries who were starting their first home care programs in those countries. And one of the presentations I got to do with these 15 countries was on volunteering, because volunteering in Eastern and Central Europe at that time was still, that word had a negative context from the Soviet years when volunteering really meant forced service. And so they were trying to build a culture of volunteerism, and we talked a lot about how could we work with these community organizations to do a better job of matching and of creating volunteer experiences that were positive. So one of the things, if you have an organization that uses volunteers or you're part of a community group that uses volunteers, I really encourage you to think about making a list of the tasks that the volunteers are doing, to think about are there ways to create almost a career ladder, if you will, of volunteering, but you might start with this and then you get to move into this so that people don't get bored, because just because we're older and perhaps 70 or 75 or 80 doesn't mean we want to sit stapling all day or putting postage on envelopes, that there needs to be a way to make all activities fun and to make it something that gives the person a sense of accomplishment. And that is a really key part of making a volunteer experience very successful, is to have some sort of a shifting in responsibilities or a way to make this fun. And this is where volunteer coordinators are very important in order to create volunteer experiences that are positive. There's a study going on right now up in Toronto, and it's a fascinating study where they're matching volunteers very specifically with their experience level to volunteer experiences to see the impact both on the volunteers' health and on their level of satisfaction. And I can't tell you the results of that study yet because it's still going on. But what we know about looking at volunteering is it's not just about having people do anything. We're now moving to another level in the research that says we have to do a better job of recognizing that someone who is retired from a professional position still wants challenges and wants things to do that match their interest, enthusiasm, and skills. And I think that's a real key when we look at how do we do the matching. Okay, let me talk to you for a couple minutes about some of the recommended resources, because we have a number this week, and I think they're really important for us to look at. So you see here the Corporation for National and Community Service. Now, this is a federal agency and engages more than 5 million Americans in service, and that's through the Senior Corps, AmeriCorps, the Learn and Serve America, and it leads President Obama's National Call to Service initiative, United We Serve. So if you have older adults interested in serving, it's a fabulous place to explore and take a look at that resource, because they have a lot of opportunities available. Now let's talk about Senior Corps, because they're one of them that I just mentioned. That's a federal program that connects more than 400,000 Americans 55 and older to service opportunities. The organization helps them become mentors, coaches, or companions to people in need. or contributes their job skills and experience to community projects and organizations. And many of us in our careers have come across the Senior Corps. They offer several ways to get involved. The volunteers receive guidance and training so they can make a contribution that suits their talents, interests, and abilities. And oftentimes the Senior Corps is working in communities, if it's a retired business person or accountant or someone who's dealt in the financial industry, they may actually be working in a way that's still using those skills, that's helping struggling entrepreneurs or people considering starting a business. And they're able to go and get free advice from people who have excellent skills and expertise. Volunteer Match, the next one that you see there, that strengthens communities by making it easier for good people and good causes to connect. The organization offers a variety of online services to support a community of nonprofit, volunteer, and business leaders who are committed to civic action. This popular service welcomes millions of visitors a year, and it's become the preferred Internet recruiting tool for more than 79,000 nonprofit organizations. So again, this is about the match issue, and it's so that people don't get into those situations of being in a volunteer experience that bores them or doesn't use their skills. The Foster Grandparent Program is a fabulous program that connects volunteers age 55 and over with children and young people with exceptional needs. Volunteers mentor, support, and help some of the most vulnerable children in the United States. Fabulous program. If you know an older adult who loves kids, it's a wonderful way to give back. And then the RSVP program is a Retired Senior Volunteer Program, and that connects volunteers aged 55 and older with service opportunities in their communities that match their skill and availability. So whether it's building houses or immunizing children, that can be enhancing the capacity of nonprofit organizations or improving and protecting the environment. RSVP volunteers, again, put their unique talents to work to make a difference. And that's another part of the Senior Corps that people can get on and look at that. And then finally, the Get Involved search engine, which is sponsored by the Corporation for National and Community Service, and that's also powered by Volunteer Match, is one of the largest and most advanced on the Internet. So all you have to do is enter your interest area, type in your zip code or state, and click on the Find Opportunities Now button to gain access to thousands of real-time volunteer opportunities that are tailored to the skills and experience of those 55 plus. So another great way to find a match, which to me is the thing I worry about the most, because I've talked to too many people at workshops who tell me about their volunteer experiences that would have been positive if it had been a better match. Okay, so now let's talk about what are some of the next steps that you can do. First of all, you can encourage older adults to volunteer. It's a great way to help others and themselves. We said if you talk about the community or the emotional connection, the sense of pride and satisfaction, the combating anxiety and depression, the dealing with the physical issues, there's no doubt that volunteering has positive impact. Another thing you can do is check with local nonprofit organizations or senior centers for volunteer opportunities that you can pass along. And you can really help encourage older adults to pass that torch of volunteerism to the next generation. And this is where I think we can be really creative with our clients. You know, if you have a client who's really struggling with a sense of purpose and meaning, if they have just lost a spouse, we know that one of the best ways to recover from the loss of a spouse more quickly is to build your social support. And one of the best ways to build social support is by getting engaged in the community and volunteering. So these things really go hand in hand. You know, one of the research studies shows that when someone becomes a widow or widower, it takes them about 2 years to come back to look like their peers who had not gone through that experience. And that one of the things that makes that move quicker is having good social support and having good engagement. And we know for a lot of people that's a real struggle if they've either been a caregiver to their spouse or they're just in a situation where they have isolated. And so this is a way you can really help people re-engage. But I think oftentimes the mistake we make is to just say, why don't you think about volunteering without giving really specific resources and really specific guidance on the matching? And that's, I think, makes this a different situation, is to talk about how do we do that for folks. Okay, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to turn this back to Steve, and we're going to open up to questions.
All right, fantastic presentation, Dr. Amy. Once again, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And as you can see from the slide up on your screen, it is time for the Q&A portion of today's web seminar. So please text in your questions, and we will pose them to Dr. Amy, as well as Mary Alexander from Homestead, who is joining us on the line now for the Q&A portion. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
Okay. First question here. I have clients who could really benefit from the social interaction of volunteering. Is it overstepping my boundaries to explain to their families that they need to get out there and volunteer?
I'm going to say that I don't think it's overstepping your boundaries, but it's all in how you communicate that idea. So, what I would take an approach by saying, there's just been we've had some really great results when we see some of our clients volunteering, and maybe give a couple of examples and tell them kind of where to start. Because sometimes you just have to approach the conversation very casually, and then kind of let them think about it for a little bit, let it percolate a little bit, and then go back with maybe some specific ideas about opportunities to volunteer.
And that, I just want to piggyback on what Mary's saying, because the only part of that bothered me was about talking to the client's family, and I just think you have to be careful about that. I mean, I would start by talking to your client first, and about the benefits and how to do that, and I would be more likely to try to find a way to bring the adult children into that conversation where it's all of you having a conversation. So, Mrs. Jones, I know that, this has been a tough time for you. I'd really love it if you're open to it, if you were open to your kids joining us, and we could all brainstorm ways, because I know that we can help you have a richer, better life right now. And I'd like to involve them, and if you're okay with that. That keeps the control in the hands of the older adult, which is, I think, a much better way to go, and you're certainly not violating any boundaries if you go that way.
Okay, next question here, and I think this is a really great one, very pertinent. The question is, what advice do you have for older adults who have mobility and or cognitive issues?
Well, there's lots of volunteer opportunities that don't have to require a lot of physical movement. So I think, again, this is the matching issue that's really key. And there are even volunteer opportunities that can be done over the phone at home. So that's why knowing what's available in your community and nationally is really key. I'd recommend getting on some of those sites that we recommended in the resources and making some phone calls and finding an opportunity that works. Many communities have a program where someone calls older adults to just be a friendly visitor on the phone and to make sure that they're up and about every day and that they're doing okay. Certainly that's something that someone at home could do using their telephone. They can even have a headset on their telephone so that they could sit comfortably and do that. I think anything, depending on the mobility issue, anything like that certainly would be helpful. Not everything has to be strenuous and require a lot of movement, and I'm sure Mary has something to add to that, too.
Right, and specifically on the cognitive question, there's a couple good ways that we've seen this work, and a lot of times what we see when we have someone with a cognitive issue, a family member will go along and volunteer with them. So it's kind of a pair going into volunteer. And we sometimes see that the environment is somewhat controlled. So we have an instance with one of our clients right now who her and her daughter go and they volunteer at their local church that this woman has been a member of for almost 50 years. And the church knows exactly the situation, but they help find projects and things for her to do, so she's in a safe environment that she's familiar with. She's doing it with a family member. So it's all in how you set up a volunteer opportunity with someone with a cognitive issue, but anything can be figured out. So again, find something that's familiar, find something that that maybe another family member would want to do with them, and then you'll have great success.
And I just want to add to that because those are great ideas, Mary. My mother had cognitive issues after the stroke, and she was in an adult day program for a number of years. And the people in that program had pretty significant cognitive limitations, and they did a whole volunteer thing with the staff there, with a nursery school that was nearby. They did a lot of intergenerational programming, but they still kept those folks with cognitive issues giving back by, as Mary said, in this case it was the staff instead of the family, but really working side by side. And I can tell you that my mother and the other people in that program, because I often volunteered and went in there as well, got such great satisfaction out of doing that. So I agree with Mary. I think it requires some creativity and a bit of a workaround, but I would say don't let someone's either physical or cognitive disabilities get in the way of allowing them to volunteer.
Okay, and kind of picking up on what you just said about that creativity, this next question I think is kind of the crux of it all. The question is, what's the best way to recruit volunteers, and what is a good way to retain them?
Go ahead, Mary. You want to start?
Well, I think it's interesting, and we might be coming at this from a couple different viewpoints, but the best way to recruit volunteers is by having your organization or whoever you need volunteers for, just getting the word out. So although it's crazy, but Facebook and all of those things, letting people know. Now, the senior population is not heavily using some of those technologies, but their family members are. And so as you recruit, you say, we're looking for someone with a lot of experience who can help us with knitting. And do you have an aunt, a grandmother, or whatever? So you kind of saturate the market that way, trying to find other people that may know someone. And then simply going to local, looking at your databases that you have at your organization, saying, so-and-so used to volunteer and doesn't anymore. Let's pick up the phone and ask them why. Or, it's really kind of a grassroots effort that you need to do on recruitment. And you find recruitment challenges in a lot of different places, whether it's finding good caregivers, finding good volunteers, finding good employees. So recruitment is an issue out there today. So again, it all comes by letting someone know that you have a need and figuring out all the different ways to get that out. Sometimes the small little local papers that you have, the Thrifty Nickels and those type that you see at the grocery store, will allow nonprofits to put in their volunteer needs at a reduced cost or no cost. So that's also a good way to get the word out that you need great volunteers. And keeping volunteers, it's all how you make them feel. If they feel as though they're giving back, if they feel as though they're making a difference, that will keep them coming back. Now, when you start putting heavy parameters and expectations on them, it becomes more of a job. So you have to remember, a volunteer is a volunteer, and they're doing it on their own time. But if you have boundaries, absolutely, let them know in advance what the boundaries are. For example, if you don't show up for the shift that you signed up for, then a child may not have a buddy to read to, or a meal might not be cooked for someone who needs it. Let them know what the outcome is, but a volunteer is a volunteer, and we still have to remember that. Dr. Amy, what advice do you have?
I love that, and I would say, just to add to that, I think thinking about it as a job description, a volunteer job description, will really help you in organizing what this looks like, and making sure that there is an opportunity for reward, for praise, for recognition. It's not that people are doing it for those things, but we are all motivated by that, and we know that people do better by having those simple human connections. A lot of the complaints volunteers have, if they have complaints, is that they were treated sort of like, second-class citizens and didn't get the sense that they mattered. So by just, as simple as it sounds, saying thank you, making sure they recognize how important they are within the organization, making sure that they feel the connection, giving them those opportunities, and ahead of time before recruiting, really thinking through what you want the volunteers to do. Another complaint volunteers sometimes have is that they were recruited and then they got there and it was sort of like, well, we don't know what to do with you now you're here, or it wasn't well organized. So if you think about what you would do for an employee and do a parallel process for a volunteer, a job description, interviewing them to make sure that it's a good fit, and then when they start to make sure that you give them some training, some orientation, let them know where things are, and that you set up a reward system especially since they're not being paid. But we know that, all the studies show that even in paid positions, the thing that motivates people the most are the intangibles, are those emotional connections. And obviously when you take pay completely out of the picture, you have to do that as well. So those things can go a long way to both recruiting and retaining.
Okay, this next question actually kind of ties into what we've just been talking here about retention, and this is kind of a specific situation on that front. So the question is, I'm a volunteer coordinator for a senior services agency. We have had a slight hours drop this year, and it is a result of members that volunteered last year not volunteering as many hours this year. Do you have any advice for this? It sort of ties into the retention aspect. Although they are not leaving, they're just volunteering fewer hours. What about that?
Well, the first thing I would do is to sit down with those people and to ask them why. So not in a way that puts them on the spot, but just so that you can understand. So, it's sort of like doing exit interviewing. Even though they're not leaving, they're working fewer hours, to really have a sense of what's shifted for them. Because when you know what the shift is, it'll help you be able to respond to that. And Mary, I'll turn that over to you, too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Amy. I mean, knowledge to me is power, and that gives you a good sense of direction. So that would be the first thing I would do. And the second thing that you can do is you can kind of put together a needs assessment. What does the organization need? And go out kind of as a recruitment campaign. This year we're expecting to need 20% more volunteer hours. Do you know anyone who would be a great volunteer? So just as you recruit good employees, you have to recruit good volunteers. But again, go to your current group of volunteers and ask them if they know anybody who would benefit from volunteering. Tell them the specific jobs that need to be done. Tell them that that you see an increase in number of hours needed. And so people then seem to want to help solve a challenge, right? So if you pose it as, help us solve this challenge. You've been a great volunteer for us for years, and now we'd like to know, do you know anyone that can do the great work that you do? So kind of put it out there. And I think you'll be surprised at kind of who steps up to help. But you have to know why they're not volunteering as much. And is there something that you need to change it internally to make that a better, process and an experience for them?
All right, next question here. Do you know of any inexpensive tools or inventories to help older adults identify their talents?
I do not. Mary, do you?
You know what? I don't know off the top of my head. I know that there was one, as we started putting Salute to Senior Service together, we worked with some volunteer companies. So if I were you, I think I'd hop on like the Service Corps website, because I remember seeing kind of a tool that helped kind of filter out where your talents would be best used. And I'm not sure if it's on that website or not, but you could also Google that and ask for an evaluation tool to where you can best volunteer your time. I'm sure that something would come up.
I have heard of tools, and I know a corporation I do some work with has looked at a potential tool, but it was not inexpensive. It was quite costly, and I don't know the name of it. I can't even share it because I don't know the name of it, but I do know those tools do exist.
Okay, next question. What are your thoughts about ways to overcome some of the practical logistical barriers that older people sometimes face when they want to volunteer? And here's some of the classics. There's no ride, there's no parking, it's not safe to be out after dark, etc. How do you address that?
Well, one of the best ways is something we talked about during the webinar, which is volunteering together. That sense of not doing it alone, because that can help with the after dark issue. It certainly could help with potentially someone else could provide the ride. No parking. It may be that parking's expensive or it's far to walk, but maybe one of the persons can walk and the other can't. So sometimes the more than one person thing can be very, very helpful. That's one starting point. And Mary, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, again, it's kind of that, it's hard to discuss the one-size-fits-all kind of concept here, because when you're asking them to volunteer, you're expecting that they'll just walk through the door, show up, and leave when they're supposed to. And you do have a lot of challenges when you're asking for senior volunteers. Rides are one, driving at dark. I mean, all of those things are very important. And so I would say ask your current volunteers, what are the most challenging aspects of volunteering? And you could even go as far as asking them, if we knew that we had a volunteer but didn't have a ride, can you buddy up with someone? So unfortunately, the service organizer is going to have to be very proactive in looking at opportunities. If you'd like to volunteer but need a ride, please let us know. If you are unable to drive in the evenings, let us know. Whatever your issues are, because that service coordinator is the most valuable person in matching volunteers together. And it does two things. So if you have kind of a buddy program, right, the volunteers are more likely to come because someone's picking someone up and they don't want to disappoint them. Or they have to actually call and say, I'm not coming today, I'm not feeling very well. So the buddy system tends to make you accountable, right? And so we see a lot of great response in that. But again, until you know what the challenges are, hard to overcome them. But covering some of the basic ones like driving at night, going home into an empty house, not having a vehicle, that kind of thing, going out when it's icy or raining, those are all challenges that I think the service organizer needs to kind of have in their back pocket to be able to address and maybe even bring them up in the interview. Look, I don't know if you drive. That would be a good time to start the discussion. Are you still driving? And if so, how do you feel about driving at night or those types of things? But again, service coordinator is the key to making that all work smoothly.
And if I can add to that, one thing that, Mary, as you were talking, occurred to me was sometimes a volunteer coordinator might specifically recruit for a volunteer to overcome those things. So someone who has a car and is willing to drive, even if that's their only part of the volunteer job,
right?
Or to walk somebody back in their home. So you could actually have a volunteer, that somebody may not have thought of that could overcome some of those things.
Okay. Next question here. What advice do you have for engaging people with chronic conditions such as depression?
One of the great things about volunteering, as we said, is it often helps people overcome depression. But we also know that that's, as you know, when someone's depressed, it's often hard for them to take initiative because they are depressed. So I would say that not creating a situation that is too hard for someone to have to require too much of them in the beginning, but perhaps, again, someone who comes and picks them up so that they don't have to make the initiative to drive and get there, limiting the time, but creating a situation that has a lot of positives for them. It would be a really key way of getting them involved. And as they start to reap some of the benefits, they'll be able to take more initiative. But it's going to be hard for them to do that initially.
Yeah, I would agree. And sometimes someone with depression, depending on the depth of that depression, if they know that that someone else has a greater need than they do, like someone really needs their assistance, it tends to make them kind of move toward that volunteerism a little bit quicker. If it's just somebody that says, you need to get out, you need to go do something, you need to get out of this house and get out in some fresh air, less likely to want to go do that. So it has to be something greater than themselves. So finding something that really is a part of this person. So if they happen to be a school teacher, right, and they have a bit of depression, asking them to go to the local library to help do X might be better than saying, let's go work in the garden at the local botanical garden. I mean, you've got to find something that connects them back to a world that they're comfortable with.
Okay. Next question here. Is peer-to-peer volunteering more effective than participating individually?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Peer-to-peer volunteering, I'm assuming you mean older adults volunteering with older adults, which can be very, very effective. And oftentimes there's a real bond because people, understand some of the issues that folks are going through. I mean, oftentimes in many communities, the Meals on Wheels programs have a lot of older adults delivering the meals and providing some sense of companionship and discussion and all of that. But I'm not sure I understand the question beyond that. Mary, do you understand that?
I'm not sure I do either. You could take it one of two ways. I like where you went with the seniors, helping seniors, because it's interesting. I'm currently at the Silver Summit, and we were talking, volunteerism was one of the topics, and it was interesting. One of the speakers was talking about how over the holidays he had both his grandmother and his wife's grandmother at their home, and one was 84 and one was 92. And the 84-year-old felt it was her responsibility to make sure that the 92-year-old had all of her needs met, had food and drink and, a blanket on the couch. And it was interesting as the speaker was talking about just making sure that the older person in the house was taken care of. So peer-to-peer, if that's what you're talking about, you might also be able to say peer-to-peer from a workforce perspective. I know a lot of companies today do volunteer work, and your peers go out and work together on projects. So, again, if we could get some clarification, that might be helpful.
Okay, this person has written back in, is peer-to-peer volunteering more effective than for one to participate individually, such as chronic conditions or volunteers in a hospital setting? Still not really sure I understand that myself. So we're going to move on to the next question here. The next question is, I work with an 88-year-old woman who is very physically active but does have dementia. What types of volunteering activities do you believe that she could be able to do?
I think both Dr. Amy and I would have trouble answering that question because we don't know her and we don't know her cognitive ability. But again, I would suggest she's going to need to partner with someone because she has a cognitive issue, family member, friend, another service volunteer, but finding something from her past that she knows very well, something that she was interested in, something that she has a lot of past knowledge in. I mean, that's probably where I would try and place her, Dr. Amy.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think what you just said is great, and I think again it's going to depend what level she's at cognitively. But I think always going with someone's past. We talk a lot, and Home Instead talks a lot about this, about using someone's life experiences while they're suffering with dementia, or someone with dementia, they don't need to be suffering, but that we can build on people's life experience as a way to keep them engaged in life, and it's true in every aspect, including volunteering. So, you think about, a woman who was very good with kids, and that was her life, if she was a stay-at-home mom. Perhaps there's a way for her to engage, again, as I talked about, my mom's adult day program and what they did. A guy who was perhaps really, and I'm being very stereotypical here, so forgive me, but I'm trying to pull out stereotypes to make them work. But a gentleman who maybe loved the yard work, that he could still perhaps volunteer in some way that would use those skills. In many communities, there are programs to help people who are unable to manage their yard work because they're older and disabled, and somebody could potentially still rake or do some things in early stage dementia. That will change as their dementia shifts, but by looking at what their life skills were and their interests were, you'll find some opportunity.
Okay. Next question. I work with a family whose father retired 5 years ago and now is getting very depressed, hesitant to leave the home. What would be the best way for me to approach the idea of volunteering to his family?
Well, I think an open, honest conversation, not just with the family, but with him again, and talking about, that all the benefits. And again, before I did that, I'd probably know a little bit about him and try to have some opportunities that might spark his interest rather than it being an abstract conversation. I'd make it very concrete. There's this opportunity or this, and not make it so overwhelming that he would shy away from it. Those are some ideas, but I would try to include him in the conversation.
I would agree, and I would add to that a lot of times when you're in that situation, the person that you feel would benefit from volunteering needs to feel needed. Like they worked all of these years, at a career, and they felt needed. They were contributing, and so sometimes when we see depression happening after retirement, it's because they don't feel the need or the pull. And so, trying to get them to understand that there still is this great need that they have and contribution they can make is a great start in the conversation.
Okay. Where do you see volunteering going in the following, in the coming years as the baby boomers age into, retirement age? Where do you see volunteering going?
I don't know what you think, Mary, but I think we're going to see a huge increase in volunteering. We have a very healthy aging population, the healthiest we've ever had, and we have an aging population that's going to want to stay active and engaged. And I think it's an absolutely perfect time for boomers as they move into retirement years to do more volunteering, and they tended to be very socially conscious. That's one of the things we know about boomers. So a lot of the predictions are that we're going to see just an increase, an upsurge in volunteering as the boomers move through that.
You know what? I absolutely agree with that, Amy. I think the only thing I would add is that as you've seen what boomers have done with aging now, they've changed it. Like they've made aging look different and more appealing and more fun, and they're doing it their way. I think they're going to be changing some of the volunteering that they do to do it their way. So volunteer coordinators and people that are seeking any volunteer needs, you really need to listen to the boomer generation that's going to be volunteering, because they are going to be kind of setting their own boundaries and looking for certain things, and they'll have very specific ideas of what they want and what they don't want. So be very open to listening to that.
Yeah, they're not going to be passive. We know that.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time for today's web seminar, but I want to thank our presenters, Dr. Amy Dupree and Mary Alexander, for another great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks, Steve. Bye-bye now.